Ask Reddit.
People who left their partner on their wedding day, what a path. Story 1. The story of a friend who has always stayed with me. It happened in the early 1970s. In Los Angeles, he gave rides to two girls who were hitchhiking and struck up a friendship. I went through the whole dating thing, and she moved in with him after a year. We planned the wedding, and her family from Detroit arrived. Everything is going according to plan, both families and friends are seated, the procession is complete, and the wedding march begins. The church doors don't open. After a few awkward moments, the door opens, and only her father stands there, saying, "Sorry, had to use the bathroom. It'll take a minute." Shortly after, her mother checks on her. She is nowhere to be found, but her wedding dress was found in her apartment. He was devastated. He said he sat there, waiting on the steps. When he found out about the dress, he and his best man went on their honeymoon. She was drunk the whole time. When she came back, all her things were moved. No note, no communication, nothing. Just torn up. 18 months later, she shows up at his door. Crying and apologizing, she asks him to marry her. She said, "Shutting that door in his face, without saying a word, was a huge moment in my life. By then, I didn't care and had moved on. He was a great guy and lived a full life with plenty of massive twists and turns, like being dumped at his altar. He was a Navy SEAL who woke up in a body bag in Vietnam because they thought he was dead. After recovery, he was home and driving to his first day at a post-deployment job. It was a stone job and he'd be polishing marble. In the parking lot, he couldn't get out of the car. He came home and his mom said a friend had just called. His friend's band had just signed with Motown and they wanted him to join them in LA. He was a backup and harmony singer for Rare Earth, a 70s band known for Get Ready and I Just Want to Celebrate. The first white rock band signed to Motown. He was a good friend, we had fun and did some business together, I still miss him. Story 2. A friend and coworker. Her family is from Europe and owns several estates. She's from Kentucky. Families fly from all over the world to this island estate. A week of celebrations. They are married by the family priest in the family church. A grand reception. Her family must have spent $1 million. At the end of the reception, they fly to Spain for the first stop of their honeymoon. The next morning, she goes out onto the balcony and whistles for the flower man in the plaza to pick up flowers. She shouts out the room number and jumps in the shower. Not understanding, she goes outside and sees 3 women walking through the plaza. She thinks he whistled at the women and gave her his room number. She packs her bags, raids, and drops him off at the hotel. He comes out of the shower to find her missing and the flower guy demanding money. He pays the guy and assumes she'll get some reception. He realizes half an hour later that his phone is missing, and so is his luggage. He calls his brother to call his phone and then calls her. He ignores the calls. He finally puts his mother on the phone, and she calls him out for whistling at girls. He tries to explain it, and his mother calls him a cheater. He never sees her again. He doesn't get a divorce because the marriage certificate wasn't filed. She keeps the rings, including her grandmother's diamonds. She posts photos of their wedding on social media. But when he returned to the US, she was evicted from the shared apartment and left. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. They were married for less than 18 hours. They were sued over those wedding and engagement rings for 2 years. Story 3. I remember when I was a kid, I had an aunt who had been dating a guy for a few years. She planned their wedding, big deal all around. It was fine. I remember being taken out to play with the family a few times and being nice. I don't remember the exact details because I've been discovering new details as I've become an adult and understand more of the story when my family talks about it, but I remember having a suit ready to go, doing the rehearsal, going to church and everything, so this must have happened just a few days before the actual wedding day, if not the day before. My aunt decided to cancel the wedding because I don't think she'd ever met the uncle's mother, and up until the week before the big day, she hadn't been able to meet her, I think because the mother-in-law wasn't fond of her and went out of her way to avoid her, despite never having met her before. I think it was just one of those psychotic mother things where no one is good enough for her child and will make the child's life a living hell, so her way of doing it was making my aunt feel dismissed and not worth her time. So my aunt said she wasn't going to get married unless she'd met her mother-in-law first and made peace with her or something. The wedding didn't happen, and they lost basically all the money for the hotel and the party, and the food couldn't be cancelled anymore, so I actually remember them delivering food to my aunt's house and my family dividing the huge pans into containers for us all to take home. I also remember taking flowers everywhere for a few weeks because my whole family had to split that too, lol. They ended up getting married later, maybe a few months later, no idea what happened with the mother-in-law, but I think they made up, although without the huge wedding that was previously planned, at my aunt's house. They're still married, have a son who's about 16, have a home, pets, and are living happily. The last time I heard of any problems was about 12 years ago, I guess the normal marriage problems. Story 4. Unfortunately, the one I know was the day after the wedding. A huge, beautiful wedding, over 250 guests, mid-20s college sweethearts. The parents were in the same social circle in their southern town. They were religious, so it was a big deal that they did it. On their honeymoon flight the next day, the groom turned to the bride, my older cousin, and said it was a mistake. Then he completely shut down and didn't speak to her. They landed in Tahiti, she flew back on the next flight home, and the story goes, he stayed in his honeymoon suite and slept with a bunch of different women. I didn't personally verify this, you know how family rumors go. A month later, he was crawling again, but she was too humiliated. She'd spent the last month returning wedding gifts, writing thank you notes, and dealing with the consequences while he participated. He wasn't ready, he felt pressured, that sort of thing. They got an annulment and now it's apparently super awkward at alumni events, lol. She's now married with 3 beautiful children, so I guess she made room for the right person in her life. You never know what happens behind closed doors. What looks perfect from the outside can be completely different for the people in the relationship. Story 5. I almost did. 2 days before the wedding, while my bridesmaids were flying into town, my fiancé left his wallet at home. I never snooped, but I did open it. The first thing I saw was a bright yellow letter from his ex-wife. It was from when I was deployed. They had a son together, but there was no mention of the boy in the letter. Granted, I was just spoiling it, but the gist was that I knew he loved getting letters, so it was so cool of me to send him one. I was pretty annoyed that it was important enough for him to carry around every day. It would be a different story if it was in a drawer or a box. But having it in your wallet, on your person, all the time. It stung me. Plus, I frequently wrote little notes about what it meant to me and hid them in places. So his letter was there, and none of mine, either. It was really disgusting. He's a pretty quiet person and had nothing to say when I asked him about it. I thought he could go to the wedding the weekend and then not send the certificate. He knocked his vows out of the park. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience at all. He even got down on one knee before my daughter, said his vows to her, and gave her custom-made earrings. The wedding weekend was an absolute blast, and he seemed so happy to be marrying me. So I thought I could forgive him. It was a time in his life I couldn't relate to, but we had a wonderful blended family and could move on. I sent the certificate. We'll be married 10 years this summer. There were some bumps, especially that first year, but I've been very happy the past 4.5 years, and I'm so glad we're together. Story 6. My best friend, a woman, married an airline pilot. The next morning they left for their honeymoon in Southeast Asia. When they landed in Singapore, she had an email from a woman in Colombia who was engaged to the same guy. She frequently flew to Colombia, so it made sense. The email had a lot of photos to show as evidence. Apparently, the other woman found out because she saw the wedding photos on social media. It was devastating. She had to disembark and collect her luggage while crying and arguing with her husband. She called her parents and booked her a different hotel and a return flight for the next day. To make matters worse, she found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. Now she has to deal with this jerk for the rest of her life. Terrible situation all around. She's beyond charming. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Sometimes I think about how someone's life can be so easily ruined by simply choosing the wrong partner, even when there are no clear red flags. Story 7. A second cousin of mine, British, was a very quiet, nerdy guy who wasn't very confident. He got a scholarship and went to college in the US where he met the woman who would go on to become his wife. She was the only woman I know of that he had a romantic relationship with. Her family was very religious and her father was some kind of minister, and so they got engaged and married quickly. On their wedding night, she admitted to him that she was a lesbian and in love with her bridesmaid and asked him if he was her cover, what's the equivalent of a beard for women, because her family would disown her if they found out. She wanted a show of love, but he thought they were in genuine love and was blinded. He called off the wedding and his family apparently disavowed her. The whole thing was discussed in very hushed tones with my mom and aunts all being very British and polite about it. As a teenager at the time I found it quite funny, but looking back I must have been devastated. Story 8. Not the day of, but a couple of days later. 2 days after my wedding, when all the wedding guests had gone home, my partner went MIA. I couldn't reach him for 24 hours. Come to find out he did an all-night ayahuasca ceremony with his yoga instructor, who was also fucked up. He walked through the door after being MIA all day and said, "I don't love you anymore." That same day, I also found boxes of her things in our garage. I was already planning to move her into our house. Why she let me skip the wedding, I'll never know. It was very hard for me and my family, who flew out for the wedding. They got married a couple of months later. It had been a while. They're divorced now, so there you have it. Story 9. A friend of mine believes a lot in signs from heaven. She went to church a week or so before the wedding to pray for a good and strong marriage. While she was praying, the church had become darker because a cloud was passing over the sun, so less light came through the windows. She saw this as a sign and called off the wedding, breaking up with the guy after telling him she was done. Everyone on her side supported her choice, but they laughed at her reasoning. Within a year, it came to light that she was hiding a gambling addiction and a ton of debt. She smuggled her name onto some fake loan contracts claiming she owed him and tried to collect from her family by claiming her debt was his after she wouldn't give him the time of day. Story 10. The bride's best friend decided the wedding was the perfect time to announce that bride was secretly pregnant. The problem is that groom was religious and saved for marriage, and the bride accepted him. They hadn't had sex before. It turns out she'd been cheating for most of the relationship because of this. I think she planned to wait until after they'd had sex and tell him the child was his. It turned into a very interesting situation where the parents of the bride and groom were very upset, thinking that he broke his promise of abstinence to them. The bride's parents were celebrating the pregnancy, the bride and groom looked absolutely horrified. Story 11. We called it the non-wedding. It was a very small, backyard swap meet, and when we showed up, a relative of the groom took us back and whispered that the wedding was off, but they had all this food and we could help ourselves. Apparently, just that morning, the groom found out that the bride beat up the bachelor party stripper, but his family said they'd already spent all the money on the party so they should tell people when they arrived. It was one of the most awkward experiences of my life because the groom sat dejectedly in a chair while people tried to cheer him up. We ate a little obliging food and then got the hell out of there. Story 12. She yelled at me the night before the wedding. AC came out in our apartment and we had 2 floor fans stacked on top of each other. And she lost her cool, how punny, and kicked the fans at me while throwing a tantrum. The neighbors called the police, but the police only checked her for bruises and didn't even listen to my side of the story. When the cops left, she said, "If I wanted you in jail, all I had to say was that you hit me." So I slept on the couch that night, no fans either, she took both. The next morning he left without me, to get ready for the wedding. I woke up and said, "F this," and went back to sleep. My family called later. I reviewed their first 50 calls. When I answered, they were yelling at me. I told them I'm not getting married. I should have left home. Of course, they showed up, and it became a thing. They downplayed the red flags from before. The wedding is over. I look miserable in the photos. It looks like the devil has his crown. That started to mean you dismissed him for a long time. Physical abuse, mental abuse, etc. More incidents with the police. I'm not perfect, I was a lazy young adult back then. But he never really motivated or supported me. He was down after down. Later, when my family found out about the abuse, they were like, "Well, why did you marry her?" Yeah. Edit, obviously we got divorced. We both found new people and remarried. I feel bad for that poor guy she married. I found a great woman who really motivated me. Now I have kids, my own house, cars, a boat, land in the East, okay, etc. Who you're with can drag you down or build you up. So don't waste your life with a bad person. Story 13. It wasn't yesterday, but I dumped my partner 3 months before our wedding. It felt like the day of, we'd already sent out invitations and paid for most of the vendors. We'd been together for 9 years and were engaged for 1. It wasn't any new information or dramatic act. I now know I'd been out of love with this person for years, but I was a man-child without community, and I felt like our relationship train had already left the station. The closer we got to the wedding, the less I felt like I needed to cling to this runaway train, and the more I felt like I needed to jump off the train before it exploded into a wall. We met as children and grew up as different people with different values. I was too scared to be honest about my feelings and perspective for years. The marriage gave me something bigger to be afraid of, a life with someone I didn't love, and an absent husband for this woman I cared deeply about. So I got off the train. And it hurt. And it turns out the train crashed into a wall even less severely. But I did do a small, brave thing after years of being a coward. I still regret the years of cowardice and lies, but I take solace in the fact that I treated this person very well and provided stability as other parts of his life unfolded. For years out, I've realized that much of my fear/inability to love wasn't just tied to my partner, it was tied to my own shit. I've been seeing someone who likes me for 6 months, and I'm not acting in the relationship. Story 14. My dad left his girlfriend at the altar, not my mom, years before. From what she told me, the relationship was quite toxic and worsened during the wedding preparations. My father apparently warned her that he was very close to calling it off. She told him she didn't have the guts to do it. So when the civil agent asked him if he was willing to cheat on the lady as a wife, he said, no. She, correctly speaking, was enraged, and she and her family tried to beat up my dad, who quickly left with his best friend. They still got married a few months later, but divorced fairly quickly. Story 15. In my rural town, a man I knew was going to be the best man at a wedding. On the morning of the wedding, Lyndon went out to the farm where the groom worked. The groom sat down and began eating his packed lunch. Lyndon told him, "You don't have time to be eating, we have to get ready for the wedding." The man said, "I'm not getting married. I never asked her to marry me. She arranged everything, told me the date, and got a suit ready. The woman showed up at the church and drove her car around the streets while she waited for the groom to arrive." This was in the 1980s, before cell phones. I don't know how she found out he wasn't coming. Everyone in town knew before nightfall. Story 16. My wife's family has a story from the early 1900s, in which a bride and groom had courted primarily by mail. On the day of the wedding, the bride got cold feet. The family was trying to figure out what to do when the bride's sister got angry and said she would marry him. The groom thought about it for a few minutes and decided he was in. The wedding happened as if nothing had happened, and they were supposedly married for over 50 years, producing a large, happy family. Story 17. My sister-in-law cancelled her wedding 1.5 months ago because she was going through a deep depression. It was so difficult, but her fiancé understood that it wasn't because she didn't want to marry him, she couldn't find any joy in life at that stage, and it was the wrong time to get married. They're still together and have 2 children now, and they're very happy with life. Story 18. I never made it that far, but I did live together twice for over 3 years each time. The first girl was from a very wealthy family. At the time we started our relationship she was attending 2 universities simultaneously. She dreamed big, a very inspiring lady to be with. 2 years down the road she had dropped out of both universities and all she talked about was being married and having 5 kids and working in her family multinational company. Her father called me one day and said we would be traveling together for the next 2 months. For the next 2 months I should be at 5 a.m. at the creek. His plane was parked at the airport every Saturday. We traveled to all his industries and operations in my country. He showed me the extent of his empire and at the end gave me a plan on how he would do mine, with him supporting me with a consistent monthly income as soon as I married his daughter. I loved those people like family, but I was only 25 at the time and felt I had so much to live up to before settling down. I explained that to him, and he felt very sad. I could see that I would have loved to be his son-in-law, but the timing wasn't right. A month later, she and her brother moved to Australia to work in an office they had there. I met her a couple of times after that. We had sex, but things never progressed. The second time the lady was much younger than me. I was in my 20s, it was mad passion in the first 6 months and we moved in together. Her family hated me for no reason and after some time I felt like she started hating me too. She was terse and more than once I caught her sexting with college classmates and it was clear she was always on her guard for some better option, literally a social climber. When I confronted her it was always these huge tantrums. I was the bad guy who didn't give her enough attention, like I didn't have a job for myself and ran my own business on the side, etc. 3 years together and she started pushing on her proposal. She was actually very gorgeous so she thought she deserved the heavens and earth, but there was no way I could see myself living through that nightmare for years to come. I openly let her know that I was preparing to go abroad for a master's program. We continued living together and I went above and beyond to keep things amicable as I could sense from her personality that she could easily fix me with false accusations and the like. I made a prenuptial agreement where she had no right to my estate and businesses and she freaked out about it. I said that was my condition and that was what kept her in line. Whenever I started to lose control of the situation she would snap and call me in 2 weeks saying that we should talk and try to set the tone to get back together but under her terms and control. It continued like this for the last year and then one day I finally left. A year later, she called me and said her then boyfriend was in a car accident and died. Could I come spend some time with her in the country I was living in at the time? I asked around and found out their relationship played with the same toxic power struggle dynamic. And in one of those breakups, the guy got drunk and died in a car accident. After she got engaged to another guy who dumped her 2 weeks before the ceremony, I saw pictures of this guy, and he was pretty ugly, so I suspected she'd gotten someone who she thought would have total control, but ended up not buying it.